Welcome to Worldview Matters, discussing controversial issues, discerning current events, defending biblical Christianity. No topic off limits. And now, here's your host, David Fiorazzo.
Hey friends, God bless you. Thank you for sharing the podcast, for tuning in. And thanks to you and your donations. Our audience is growing. We are a nonprofit, and we're at the very end of our fundraiser for the spring/early summer. We have an opportunity to expand our reach by getting on Pioneer Network, Beck TV, and God's Learning Channel. And if you have not already donated to Worldview Matters, please consider it if you are financially able, of course. And we would love to send you an autographed copy of Alex Newman's brand new book, Indoctrinating Our Children to Death, or my new book, Assault on the Image of God, for a one-time gift of $200, or for a monthly $25 a month if you can do that as an ongoing thing. And man, we just appreciate every donation. But you will also get, if you're a first-time donor, and we've had a lot recently, praise God, you'll get a copy of this mug. Not a copy. You'll actually get this mug, not just a copy. Worldview Matters on one side and my tagline on the back. Keep speaking the truth about things that matter. Just don't put it in the dishwasher. So, tax-deductible, worldviewmatters.tv. I've got my brother, Pastor Brandon Holthaus, with us again. So good to reconnect with him. And if you missed our Tip of the Spear episode, I was blessed to be on there just over a month ago with Pastor Brandon. There it is. Brandon with special guest. Oh, no, it doesn't say special. I think you got to fix that, Brandon.
Yeah, we need to change that.
It was in my head. I don't know why I said special. Brother, good to see you.
Good to see you, David. Thanks for having me on, my friend.
All right. Thanks for all that you're doing. You, sir, have been confronting and tackling a lot of big issues and exposing a lot of things, informing people. You are equipping the saints. God bless you. And by the way, I didn't even mention pastor of rockharborchurch.net, rockharborchurch.net. You can go to YouTube and look up Tip of the Spear. Tip of the Spear. That's his podcast. He talks to some great people like Alex Newman, Carl Teichribb, and many others. So, you've got an event coming up. It's actually a cruise. It's going to be in October, but people better make their plans now, because who's going to be there? Ken Michael, Mondo Gonzalez, Brandon, Tom Hughes, Billy Crone. I've talked to all of these brothers on a Churches of Revelation Bible prophecy or Bible truth in prophecy cruise. Tell us a little bit about that and where they can get info.
Yeah, they can go to our website, rockharborchurch.net, and find the cruise on there. And what we're going to do is we got the cast of speakers that you mentioned, that while we're on the cruise, we're going to be talking prophecy. But then when we're on site, we're going to be doing teachings there at the locations of the 7 churches. We're also going to do the journeys of Paul and go over not only the historical background, but then talk about the future background. The future implications of for instance, like when we get to Laodicea, we're going to talk about the era of Laodicea, so to speak, of, the last days church and what that looks like. And so it's going to be a phenomenal time. So, man, if people want to go, they can click on that website and go on there and get all the details there.
Awesome. That just sounds so exciting, man. Love Revelation 2 and 3. Very insightful about what Jesus thinks about his church. And at that time, he had some interesting things to say to at least 5 of those churches, right, Pastor Brandon?
Yes, he did. Some warnings, man. Some rebukes, that's for sure.
Yeah, I wasn't planning on asking you this because it's the cruise, and one of you guys is going to talk about Laodicea. Do you see any parallels with America and the lukewarm? Are we uninformed, fearful, too busy, distracted, or are we lukewarm, or is it a combination here?
It's funny you mentioned that, because if anyone studies Laodicea, you can see the background of them, that they were a very affluent church, and they sold black wool that made a lot of money. They had Phrygian eye salve that they sold for money. And it was a health center. People went there for health reasons. It was a commercial banking center. And so the people of Laodicea, the church members, were very affluent and very wealthy. And basically what ended up happening is it put them in this spiritual stupor of lukewarmness. And interesting enough, the parallels with that is what's going on in the West and the United States with the church in the West. The Western church has those same characteristics of affluence.
Interesting.
And it has put the American church to sleep because, the funny thing is it put Laodicea asleep so bad that they couldn't self-evaluate themselves spiritually. They thought they were blessed because they had all this money and they're doing well. And man, people make that mistake too in their lives. Well, I'm materially blessed. I have money. I have things. I must be blessed of God. But then Jesus comes with his evaluation of them. He says, man, you're spiritually poor, you're blind, you're naked.
That's right.
And he dresses them down saying, you have no idea what's happened. You've actually put yourself out of reality. And David, for goodness sakes, that's exactly what's happening here in the United States. We got the church that's totally asleep. They're not fighting the real issues. They think they're blessed because they've got money, they're doing well. And really they're not, because we're losing. Well, let me put it this way: we've lost the culture war because of it.
Yeah.
And so the interesting thing that I noticed is even Francis Schaeffer said this back in the '60s, and he says what's going to happen to America is they're going to go to sleep. The believers are going to go to sleep because of two things. And he said, number one, the affluence. And then number two, the personal peace he mentioned. And he says personal peace is this. They just want to go to their job. They want to come home from their job, sit in front of the TV and do nothing and not impact the culture, not engage the culture or whatnot. And he goes, that desire for personal peace mixed with affluence is going to be the death knell for the church in America. And David, that's what we're seeing.
Yeah.
Very shocking, but I guess we shouldn't be shocked.
No, we shouldn't. And Jesus said he'd rather have us be hot or cold. But he said, if you're lukewarm, I'll spit you out of my mouth. And didn't I read something about, you said peace. There's another word, security or safety.
Yeah.
People pursuing peace and safety. And I think it's 1 Thessalonians. But Pastor Brandon, your ministry focuses on guiding the remnant church in the last days.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that. I use the word a lot, and I just assume a lot of people know what it means when we say remnant, because I think it's something that needs to be defined. So share what distinguishes, first, what it is and what distinguishes it from the mainstream of Christianity.
Yeah, what the concept of the remnant church is what I'm pulling from even the Old Testament concept of the remnant in Israel, that you would have the nation of Israel, but there would always be a unbelieving element and then a believing element. Isaiah flushed that out. And then even Paul talks about the remnant of Israel in Romans chapter 9 through 11. So what you start seeing in Christendom, and I'm using that word as a broad term, when Jesus gave the mystery parables, he talked about Christendom, that there would be wheat and tares in Christendom. And what we are now seeing is that division has become very obvious, because in the parable, as you know, David, the wheat and the tares kind of look the same when they're growing up together. And Jesus said, allow them to grow up together. Well, it's not until harvest that the wheat and tares are separated. And it's interesting about wheat and tares is we can distinguish a tare at the end of harvest because it'll still shoot up straight and it has this black, greenish color, versus a head of wheat that actually is golden and bows in submission to God. And so we can only tell the difference at the end of harvest. Well, interesting enough, then, so Jesus is saying there's also a remnant in the church. And then when we go to the seven churches, what I like to use is there's two churches that get no condemnation, but get commendation. And that is the church of Smyrna, the persecuted church, and then the Philadelphia church. And if you look at both of those churches, they're doing exactly what the Lord needs them to do. They have little resources. They're being persecuted for they're holding fast to his word and not denying his name. And that's what we see develop, David, that there is a smaller remnant in Christendom, that Philadelphia Smyrna element. And then a lot of Christendom is apostate or the tares among the wheat. And, you know, as an example, if people say, well, what do you mean? Well, when you see a transgender pastor behind a pulpit, there's a good example of a wheat among the tares, okay?
Pastor, right? Transgender, yeah, you got to put that in air quotes.
Exactly. And then you're seeing, this apostasy. So the interesting thing with Laodicea, David, is and people have to understand in your interpretation of the book of Revelation, you interpret the churches on an individual level. They will exist at all times. And then what I've seen from, teachers like John Walvoord and Arnold Fruchtenbaum is you look at the seven churches, and what you have is a chronology as well as for the church age. So basically in the chronology, the church ends in Laodicea with a remnant element of Philadelphia lasting to the end. So the interesting thing is, so you'll have a lukewarm church, but then the Apostle Paul is mentioning that in the last days of the church, there will be great apostasy. And so you have this indifference attitude in the church and really shallowed out, which totally makes sense of why apostasy would just flourish, because everyone in Christendom is a mile wide and an inch deep. They don't know their Bibles. That's very clear. The last study I saw from Barna, David, is 4% of Americans, 4% have a biblical worldview. Well, guess what's going to happen? That mixture with apostasy, it's over. It goes off the chain. So now we have 54% of Christendom says that they support gay marriage. We now have churches even here around me locally, David, that will not talk about murdering babies and how that's wrong because they say it's political. Yeah. And then the new dividing issue is Israel. We got churches that are becoming anti-Semitic. I hate to say that, but it's true. We got churches that are trying to stay neutral on the issue. And then we have churches that fully support the Palestinians.
It's a head scratcher.
And so it's like, what, do you not know the Bible? And so, David, it's all these issues, man.
Well, it's got to come back to that, what you just said. Do you not know the Bible? Didn't Jesus say to the most educated religious leaders, have you not read your own scriptures, right? Didn't he say? So I think a lot of, and we have to put church in air quotes sometimes now in America. Yeah. I'm throwing a number out there, like 70% of the churches. We've got to put pastor in air quotes when you got people that are preaching things that are either an abomination or clearly defined as sin in Scripture. Yeah. But here we are, and you mentioned Barna. They've done the research, and I guess it shouldn't shock us at this point, knowing it's been such a gradual decline. The problem is the pulpits too. One of the side issues, not that it's a side issue, I guess. What was it? Only 37% of pastors have a biblical worldview. Was that right?
Yeah, it's something to that degree. And then from that, and that's the senior pastor, David. You go to the associate level or the guy teaching the high school and junior high level, dude, it's like 12%, 15%. Yeah,
and they're teaching the kids.
Yeah, and that's the next generation. So interesting in this last study with Barna, what Barna noted was obviously he noted two problems that created this. He said, number one, it was the churches, no doubt about that, and the pulpits. So the pulpits are shallowed out in their teaching. And again, David, you go to some of these churches and it's a motivational speech for 20 minutes. Yeah. It's a 45 to an hour long worth of worship service. And the guy gets up there and he spins yarns and tells stories, but he's really not exegeting the passage or whatever. Yeah. And so the pulpits are failing. But then the second source that Barna noted was the Christian parents. And it's gotten worse every year. And here's the mentality that they said. They said that the parents are raising these kids. Now, the parents might be Christian, but here's how they're raising them. They're letting little Bobby and Billy and Susie make their own decisions on their own spirituality. That we don't really want to force our Christian views on our kids. So we're just going to let little Bobby figure it out for himself.
Gosh.
And isn't that crazy? What Barna noted is that basically created a vacuum and had the opposite effect to where these other ideologies came in and hooked the kids.
Yeah. Syncretism, religious pluralism, they fall for all these other issues and works and all this, you know, and they're social justice activists. And the Christian, maybe in air quotes, the Christian parents wonder, wow, why weren't they brought up on the ways of the Lord? So many issues, Brandon. Yeah. That's why we love having you on. You can talk about all these things. And we've got to take a brief pause. Pastor Brandon Holthaus, and it is rockharborchurch.net. We'll be right back on Worldview Matters.
Introducing Patriot Mobile, the wireless carrier that stands with you. We are committed to supporting the values that make our nation great. With affordable plans and reliable nationwide coverage, Patriot Mobile is not just a wireless service. It's a call to action for those who believe in the American dream. Because this year is not just any year, it's the most important year since our nation's founding. Choose a wireless carrier that shares your values. Choose Patriot Mobile.
Get free activation now with promo code DAVID. If you know somebody interested in sponsoring Worldview Matters, send us an email, worldviewmatters@fpeusa.org, or go to the website, worldviewmatters.tv, and our producer will get right back to you. Pastor Brandon Holthaus is our guest today, and I love this man of God, this brother. You alluded to it before, and that's anti-Semitism and the growth. We've seen it off the charts on steroids. Yeah. A new level of evil, really. I don't think most people in America, and especially in Christian churches, thought we'd see it to the level we're seeing it on college campuses. And, you know, you've discussed these things. You've talked about the rise of anti-Israel sentiment. You've discussed the Biden administration's stance on Israel. And how do you interpret these developments in light of Bible prophecy?
Wow. Well, you know, the interesting thing
I know we can spend an hour on that.
Yeah, man. The first off, let's just start with the marker from Scripture. The marker from Scripture says in Zechariah chapter 12, verse 3, that Israel will be isolated and hated of all nations. Israel itself will become a burdensome stone. And we know that happens in the future, but what's happening is the groundwork is getting set up for that. And eventually what's going to happen, David, as you know, Israel's going to be so isolated, they're not going to have help from the United States because it says all nations will come against her. So here's the dilemma that we know on the ground that's going on in Israel. Israel gets its weapons from the United States. And the United States is trying to tell them how to fight this war and not let Israel win. And they want Hamas to survive in a two-state solution, which Israel's saying we're not doing. And they do not want them going up to the north and dealing with Hezbollah, according to the Biden administration. And so what we got going on is some daylight is happening, separation from the United States and Israel. And what's going to happen is it puts Israel in a situation where they're not going to have military arms, perhaps, and they're going to have to look to another source because the rockets in Iron Dome and David's sling and all that come from the United States. Well, I think what we're getting ready to see in the future down the line is Israel will have to turn to someone else militarily instead of the United States. And we know by prophecy that's going to be the Antichrist. And the Antichrist is going to be wealthy. He worships the god of war, or fortresses, I should say, which basically has military. And when you look at Isaiah 28, the passage that talks about what's inside the covenant that Antichrist does with Israel, it is to protect Israel militarily from another invasion. So we know where this is heading. So this daylight that we're seeing between the United States and Israel, this anti-Semitism, is going to just continue to grow to where they're isolated and they're going to need help. Now, the anti-Semitism you're seeing on the college campuses and just globally is another spiritual aspect that has been an undercurrent for a long time. And really, the anti-Semitism didn't go away after World War II. It just stayed hidden because it wasn't kosher to talk about being anti-Israel or anti-Jew, but it's still there. Yeah. What I say is this new thing that we've seen in wokeness, wokeness always perpetrates a victim group and an oppressor group because it's cultural Marxism. And so what they've done is they've put Israel and Jewish people in the category of oppressor or white privilege, and now has made Hamas or the Palestinians or whoever as victims, even though they're terrorists, David. even though these people are terrorists. They put Hamas now in the victim status. And so this whole cultural Marxism has fostered this anti-Semitism. Yeah. And of course, then this is the outbreak on the college campuses that we see.
Well, again, and that comes from the K through 12. They graduate, they go to these universities, and then it gets embedded deeper, and they just think they're supposed to be social justice activists, and these are the things, the talking points. They know what the colleges approve of. But you mentioned something, you know, I asked you about Biden and the left and the Democrats, their stance on Israel, but you guys are going to be talking about this, aren't you, at an event coming up in, is it Woodland Hills, California? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, we're going to have a 2-day conference, September 6th and 7th in Woodland Hills, California, just about 30 miles outside of LAX airport. And what we're going to do is, the title of it is called The Geopolitical Ramifications of the 2024 Election, because whatever happens in this next election, it can get really bad real quick, right? Yeah. And we have seen already how bad it is, but we can see an acceleration or a catalyst that starts putting things in place, like a digital currency, a one world government, giving our sovereignty to the World Health Organization or whatever, you know, some type of bird flu threat that's going to shut down society. Who knows? And so I'm bringing in guys that are kind of the leading experts in their field. One of your colleagues, Alex Newman, will be there. And we're going to talk about, hey, what does this election mean if it goes a certain way? Not just from a geopolitical standpoint, we're going to talk about that, but also from a prophetic standpoint. Like what trajectory is this sending things into?
Okay, awesome. Again, that's October. You will probably September, like I said.
Yeah.
You'll probably have information on your website very, very soon on that, rockharborchurch.net. Yeah. So Brandon, what role do you see technology playing in this, the fulfillment of end-time prophecies, surveillance, control? Speak to that for a couple minutes.
Yeah, what we're seeing now is that the globalist elites, which are nothing more than technocrats. Now, Patrick Wood is really sharp on technocracy.
Yeah. Yes.
And so if he's the main guy, but really what was being developed is a technocratic elite. And these elites think that they're gods. They want to be God. They want to control everything. They think they're smart. This comes from Plato's Republic, you know, where you have this, this class of elites that are smarter than everybody, the king philosophers, as Plato talked about. Well, these king philosophers are using technology in order to get the control. So they're using AI, quantum computing, and they want to digitalize our DNA. They want to digitalize on our identifications, on our travel, and then eventually a digital currency, which they're currently working on now.
Yeah.
But what is it all about, David? It's all about control. And satanically, what's happening with technology is Satan cannot do what God does. God has the three omnis. Satan can't do that. So what he does is he's using man's technology that has been developed to counterfeit the omnis of controlling people from the outside and surveillance of people from even inside their bodies. And so this stuff is very nefarious, and they're going to sell it to everybody as this is going to give you peace and security. This is going to eliminate criminals because there's going to be no under the table money. We're going to know who's coming through our border, even though we're going to leave our border wide open. And this is just going to be sold to everybody. This is going to enhance your life as for peace and security.
Of course.
So unfortunately, it's all about tyranny, man, and authoritarian rule.
Yeah, but we will bow the knee. I mean, we saw what happened during COVID, right? Oh, sure, we'll do that. We'll submit. Really quick, Brandon, 3.5 minutes left.
Yeah.
How do you encourage believers to maintain a healthy balance between staying informed and trusting God's sovereignty with all that's going on, potentially overwhelming the stuff that's going on, but we do need to be discerning, trusting God's sovereignty and kind of staying informed and in the Word?
Well, it's a bittersweet aspect because you're watching your culture and your society crumble right in front of you. And that's sometimes hard to grasp.
Yeah.
And that's the bittersweet thing of understanding prophecy. But what we have to understand is truth and responsibility give us meaning in life. We get our truth and responsibility from God. Okay, so what is our job? Our job is to understand what's going on and then tell the truth about it. That's number one. And that brings us our responsibility as a watcher on the wall. So my admonition to Christians is, you were created for such a time as this. This is not a time to go into the corner and put on the white sheet and wait for Jesus to come back and get you. Yes, he's coming back to get us, but we have a job to do. We have a responsibility. And we're going to warn. We're going to be like the prophet Jeremiah. We're going to warn, and they may not listen to us, David.
Yes.
But at least I will do my job of getting the word out and being responsible with that. So I think that's our call. It's not a time to shrink back. It's a time to engage and then rescue as many on the rescue boat of Christ as we can before it's too late.
Man, I love you, brother. Rock Harbor Church is blessed. I mean, you're a watchman on the wall, and we need more men of God like you in the pulpit, and not afraid to speak to any issue that's confronting the church, not being afraid to expose evil, not backing down when they say you can't talk about Jesus or you can't talk about politics. Right. So,
and they hide behind that all the time. So, you can talk about politics. That's why we had the Black Robe Regiment in the Revolutionary War, for goodness sakes.
Yes. Yes, a lot of ignorance about the Johnson Amendment, and maybe that's for another podcast. Next time we've got to do 2 shows with you, Brandon. It's just too fast, but thank you.
You betcha, man.
For all that you do. Again, there's the Bible Truth and Prophecy Cruise. Sign up for that, guys. I mean, that sounds wonderful. Churches of Revelation and Journeys of Paul with these 5 great men of God. So, Brandon, people will go to your website and check out that one coming up in September, Woodland Hills.
Yeah, we'll have it up soon.
Sounds fascinating and needed for the church to be ready for whatever might play out. But keep trusting God. You made a good point. We are here for such a time as this. And that includes you, brother. You're one of the people that, the men of God, I can say you're leading. You're doing your job. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
I apprate it. Thank you, David.
All right.
Keep up the good work yourself, my friend. We need you out there.
Yep, Lord
Amen.
willing, we will. Thanks, guys, for sharing the podcast. You guys get it out there, and that's how it's growing. And we're thankful to guests that we can have on to hopefully encourage you, hopefully edify you a little bit, maybe equip you, but challenge you to. That's not a bad thing, to be challenged with some of these things, even if it goes against something you've been taught or heard, even in the church. Anyway, great stuff. God bless you, friends. And as always, keep speaking the truth about things that matter. See you next time.